Was it fate, or just the cruel irony of a cold November night that brought two strangers together at a bus stop where neither of them should have been? The wind cut through the empty street like a blade. It was the kind of cold that doesn't just chill your skin. It reaches inside you, wraps around your bones, and makes you question every decision that led you there. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting long, trembling shadows across the pavement. And there she stood, alone, arms wrapped tightly around herself, her breath forming small clouds that disappeared into the darkness. Her name was Elena, 23 years old, art student, dreamer. She'd missed the last train home after staying too late at the gallery where she worked part-time. The night shift manager had locked up early, leaving her stranded in a part of the city she barely knew. Her phone was dead. Her coat, thin, worn, more fashion than function, did nothing against the November wind. She told herself the bus would come soon. She told herself a lot of things that night. Then she heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming closer through the fog that had begun to roll in from the river. Elena's heart quickened. The street was empty. The shops were closed. Even the traffic lights blinked yellow in that tired, mechanical way they do when the city is given up on the night. She didn't turn around. She'd learned, like most women do, to make herself small in moments like these. To pretend she didn't notice. To hope invisibility was enough. But the footsteps stopped, right beside her. "That bus hasn't run this late in 3 years. His voice was quiet, matter-of-fact. No threat in it, but no warmth either. Just information, delivered like he was reading it off a sign. Elena finally turned. He was tall, maybe late 20s, with the kind of face that looked like it had seen more than it should have by now. Dark hair, darker eyes, a jaw set in permanent contemplation. He wore a jacket, thick, military green, the kind that's been through winters and wars and refused to quit. "What?" Elena's voice came out smaller than she intended. "The bus," he repeated, not looking at her but at the timetable posted on the shelter. "Route was canceled 2 summers ago. They just never took the sign down." He paused. "Where are you trying to go?" Elena told him. The address spilled out before she could think better of it. Maybe it was the cold. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the strange, inexplicable calm in his voice, like someone who understood being lost. He nodded slowly, then did something she didn't expect. He shrugged off his jacket and held it out to her. "No, I can't. You're shaking. So are you. I'm used to it." There was something final in the way he said it. Not unkind, just certain. Like this was a fact of his existence and he'd made peace with it long ago. Elena hesitated, then took the jacket. It was heavy, warm, and smelled faintly of coffee and something woodsy, cedar maybe, or old books. She pulled it around her shoulders and felt her entire body sigh with relief. "There's a night bus on 5th, he said. 15-minute walk. I'll show you." And just like that, they started walking. His name, she learned, was Daniel. He didn't offer much more than that. He worked nights, security at a shipping warehouse near the docks. He'd been walking home when he saw her at the bus stop. Something about the way she stood there, he said, reminded him of someone. He didn't say who. They walked through streets that felt like they belonged to a different city entirely. The kind of neighborhoods that only exist after midnight, where the boundary between dream and reality starts to blur. Empty playgrounds, shuttered diners, a corner store with a neon sign that buzzed and flickered like a dying heartbeat. Daniel moved through it all with the ease of someone who belonged to the darkness, while Elena felt like an intruder, stepping into a world she'd only ever glimpsed from train windows. "You do this often?" she asked. "Help random people at bus stops?" "Not often," he said. "Not never." "That's cryptic. That's honest." They turned a corner, and suddenly the city opened up. Before them stretched the river, black and glittering under the distant lights of bridges and buildings. The wind off the water was even colder, but somehow cleaner. It smelled like possibility and endings all at once. "We can cut through the park," Daniel said, gesturing to a pathway lined with skeletal trees. "Faster." But Elena had stopped walking. She was staring at the river, at the way the lights danced across its surface like trapped stars. For a moment, she forgot about the cold, forgot about being stranded, forgot about everything except the strange, unexpected beauty of this terrible night. "You okay?" Daniel asked, and for the first time there was something softer in his voice. "Yeah," Elena said quietly. I never see the city like this. This empty. This honest." Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Something she couldn't name but felt in the space between them. A recognition, maybe, or a question neither of them knew how to ask yet. They walked through the park in silence. The bare branches overhead made patterns against the sky like cracks in porcelain. Their footsteps crunched on frost-covered grass. And Elena realized, with a strange sort of clarity, that she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the darkness, not of being lost, not of the stranger beside her who'd given her his jacket without asking for anything in return. When they reached 5th Street, the night bus was already there, engine idling, doors open like a promise. "This is you," Daniel said. Elena started to take off the jacket, but he stopped her. "Keep it. Bring it back sometime." "I don't even know where. You know where the gallery is. I'll find you." It wasn't a question. It was something else entirely. A thread being cast across the distance, waiting to see if she'd catch it. Elena climbed onto the bus and took a seat by the window. As the bus pulled away, she looked back. Daniel was still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching her go. The streetlight above him flickered once, twice, and in that stuttering illumination, he looked less like a man and more like a guardian. Some ancient, necessary thing that appears when you need it most, then disappears back into the mythology of the city. She pressed her hand against the cold glass. He didn't wave. Neither did she. But something had been set in motion that neither of them could take back. What Elena didn't know, what she couldn't have known as the bus carried her home through the sleeping city, was that Daniel would keep his promise. And when spring came, when the world turned green and warm and possible again, that jacket would become a bridge between two people who'd been lost in different ways, searching for something they couldn't name until they found it in each other. But first, winter had to run its course. Winter settled over the city like a held breath. Days shortened, nights stretched, and Elena wore Daniel's jacket everywhere. It became her armor against the world, against the morning commute, against her professor's critiques, against the small, persistent loneliness that had always lived in her chest, but that she'd never named until now. The jacket smelled less like him with each passing day, but she couldn't bring herself to wash it. That felt like erasure, like breaking a promise she'd made without words. 3 weeks passed, then 4. She kept expecting him to appear at the gallery, kept watching the door between greeting customers and rearranging exhibits. But Daniel never came, and Elena began to wonder if she'd imagined the whole thing, if that night had been some fever dream born of cold and exhaustion, a story she'd told herself to make being lost feel like destiny instead of carelessness. December arrived with its false cheer. The city dressed itself in lights and garlands, trying to convince everyone that magic was possible if you just believed hard enough. Elena didn't believe in magic. She believed in art, in coffee that was too hot, in the way certain songs could break your heart before you even understood why. But magic? That was for people who hadn't learned yet that the world was mostly ordinary, punctuated by brief moments of something else. She was closing the gallery on a Tuesday evening when she saw him, not Daniel. Someone who looked like him. Same height, same dark jacket. Her heart lurched before her brain caught up, and then the man turned and she saw his face clearly. A stranger. Just another person moving through their own life, unaware of the disappointment they'd just caused someone they'd never met. Elena locked the door and started walking. She didn't know where she was going. Away, mostly. Away from the gallery. Away from her cramped studio apartment where the radiator clanked but never quite produced heat. Away from the weight of waiting for something that clearly wasn't coming. Her feet carried her through familiar streets that felt different under snow beginning to fall. Fat, lazy flakes that caught in her hair and melted on her cheeks like small, cold kisses. She walked until the neighborhoods changed, until the buildings grew older and the streetlights more sparse, until she realized, with a start, that she'd walked all the way to the docks. The shipping warehouse rose against the night sky like a monument to industry's slow death. Most of its windows were dark. A few glowed weakly from within. Elena stood across the street, staring at it, trying to remember if this was where Daniel had said he worked. He'd been vague about details that night, or maybe she'd been too cold to listen properly. Memory she'd learned in her art history classes was less photograph and more impressionist painting, all feeling and interpretation, details dissolving into atmosphere. "You lost again?" The voice came from behind her. And this time, Elena's heart didn't lurch. It stopped completely, then restarted at double speed. She turned. Daniel stood there, bundled in a different jacket, this one thinner and cheaper looking. His face was the same, though, careful, guarded, like a question he was afraid to ask. In his hands, he held 2 paper cups of coffee, steam rising from their plastic lids like offerings to winter gods. Elena's voice failed her. She'd imagined this moment 100 times, planned what she'd say, but now that he was here, real and solid and inexplicably holding coffee, all her rehearsed words scattered like snow. "Figured you might come eventually," Daniel said quietly. "Been bringing 2 coffees to work for 3 weeks, just in case." He held one out to her. "This one's probably terrible, but it's hot." Elena took it. Their fingers brushed. The coffee was terrible, bitter and burnt and perfect. "You said you'd find me," she said. "I know. At the gallery. I know. But you didn't come." Daniel looked away, toward the warehouse, toward the river beyond it. When he spoke, his voice was so low, she had to step closer to hear. "I went. Twice. Stood outside for 20 minutes each time. Couldn't make myself go in." "Why not?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I gave you my jacket on the worst night of your life, and I didn't want you to associate me with only that, with being cold and lost and scared. I wanted—" He stopped. Started again. "I wanted you to come here on your own, if you wanted to, not because you felt obligated to return something." Elena stared at him. Snow collected on his shoulders, in his hair. He looked like something conjured from winter itself. Solid, but somehow temporary. Like if she reached out, he might dissolve into the night. "You're an idiot," she said. That surprised a laugh out of him. Small, startled. "Yeah, probably. I've been wearing your jacket for a month. I noticed. You couldn't have just left a note, a phone number?" "I don't have a phone." "Who doesn't have a phone?" "Someone who doesn't want to be found. Usually." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and his expression was so open it hurt to witness. "But then I met someone at a bus stop who made me reconsider what I wanted." The snow fell harder. The city sounds faded. Traffic, voices, the constant hum of existence, until it felt like they were the only 2 people left in the world. Elena knew this moment was important, knew it was one of those hinges on which whole lives turn. She could walk away. Thank him for the coffee. Return the jacket. Let this story end the way most stories end. with two people returning to their separate orbits, a brief intersection already fading into anecdote. But she didn't want to walk away. "I'm off in an hour," Daniel said. "There's a diner 3 blocks from here, opens at midnight for the night shift workers. Makes the best blueberry pancakes you'll ever have, even though pancakes at midnight makes no sense." He paused. "If you wanted to wait, if you wanted company." "I want company," Elena said. The words came out easier than she expected. So she waited. Daniel led her into the warehouse's break room, a fluorescent-lit space with vending machines and uncomfortable chairs and safety posters from the 90s. She sat at a scarred table and sketched in her notebook while he disappeared to do whatever security guards do in warehouses full of things going nowhere. She drew the view from the window. Shipping containers stacked like a child's abandoned blocks, the river beyond them, the city skyline reduced to silhouettes and suggestions. When Daniel returned, still smelling like cold and machinery, they walked to the diner through snow that had transformed the city into something quieter, softer. The diner was exactly as promised. Fluorescent brightness, vinyl booths, a waitress who looked like she'd been pouring coffee since the place opened in 1967, and would continue until the end of time itself. They ordered pancakes. They talked. And this is where the story changes. This is where it stops being about a jacket or a cold night or two strangers meeting by accident. Because over pancakes at midnight, Elena learned that Daniel had been a soldier once. That he'd come home 3 years ago from a place he wouldn't name, carrying things you can't see on x-rays. That he'd lost people. That he worked nights because sleep was complicated, and darkness felt safer than pretending to be normal during daylight hours. And Daniel learned that Elena's art wasn't just art, it was archaeology. That she painted to excavate feelings she didn't have words for. That her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19, and she'd been a little bit lost ever since, moving through the world like someone waiting for permission to stop merely surviving and start actually living. They talked until the diner started filling with dock workers and nurses ending shifts and delivery drivers beginning theirs, until the sky through the windows started turning that particular shade of blue that comes just before dawn. The color of possibility, of in-between, of neither night nor day but something suspended. "I should let you sleep," Elena said, though she didn't want to leave. "I don't sleep much," Daniel said, "but I should let you go home." They stood outside the diner as the city slowly woke around them. The snow had stopped. The streets were that perfect, untouched white that only lasts minutes before the world ruins it. "Can I see you again?" Daniel asked. "Not in a month. Soon." "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow." Elena started to leave, then stopped. She began taking off his jacket. "Keep it," Daniel said quickly. "At least until spring. You'll freeze otherwise." "What about you?" "I told you. I'm used to the cold." But Elena saw him shiver as he said it, saw the vulnerability he was trying to hide. And she understood then that this wasn't about a jacket at all. It was about trust, about letting someone keep a piece of you and hoping they'd handle it carefully. She kept the jacket, but she took his hand first, just for a moment, just long enough to feel how cold his fingers were, how warm hers had become. "Tomorrow," she said again. "Tomorrow," he agreed. And this time, when they parted, it wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something that would unfold slowly, carefully, through the dark months of winter. Coffee at midnight, conversations in diners, long walks through snow-covered streets, where they traded pieces of themselves like gifts. Elena showed Daniel her paintings. The sad ones, the angry ones, the ones that tried to capture what loss looks like when you're brave enough to look directly at it. Daniel took Elena to the river at dawn, showed her how the light changes everything, how the same view can be 100 different paintings depending on when you witness it. They didn't fall in love all at once. They fell in love in increments, in small moments that accumulated like snow, individually insignificant, together transformative. But winter was cruel that year. And just when Elena started to believe that maybe, finally, she'd found someone who understood the specific shape of her loneliness, just when she started to imagine what spring might look like with Daniel in it, something happened that threatened to bury everything they'd been building beneath an avalanche neither of them saw coming. It started with a phone call Elena wasn't supposed to hear. They were in Daniel's apartment for the first time. A sparse studio above a laundromat, the kind of place that felt temporary, even though he'd lived there for 2 years. The walls were bare, except for a single photograph he'd turned face down on the windowsill. Elena hadn't asked about it yet. She was learning that with Daniel, you didn't push. You waited. You let him unfold at his own pace, in his own time. She was making tea in his tiny kitchen when his landlord knocked. Some issue with the pipes in the building. Daniel stepped into the hallway to talk, leaving his jacket, the new one, the cheap one, draped over a chair. And that's when his phone rang. Elena wasn't going to answer it. She wasn't that person. But the name on the screen made her freeze. Veterans Crisis Line. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, then stopped. Immediately started ringing again. Her hand moved before her mind could catch up. She answered. "Daniel?" A woman's voice, professionally calm but edged with concern. "Daniel, we got your message from last night. I'm calling to follow up. Are you somewhere safe right now?" Elena's throat closed. "This isn't... I'm not Daniel." A pause. "Is Daniel available? This is a wellness check following a crisis call." He's right outside. I can get him." "Ma'am, I need you to tell me. Is Daniel in immediate danger?" No, he's fine. He's just talking to someone in the hallway." "Okay, that's good. Can you have him call us back? It's important." The call ended. Elena stood there, phone in hand, watching steam rise from the forgotten tea kettle. Last night. Daniel had called a crisis line last night, after he'd left her at her apartment, after he'd kissed her forehead and said he'd see her tomorrow, after he'd smiled, that rare, real smile that made his whole face change. The door opened. Daniel came back in, saying something about the pipes, about how the landlord wanted them to conserve water for a few days. Then he saw her face, saw his phone in her hand. "Elena." They called. The crisis line. He went very still. The kind of still that isn't calm, but its opposite. A complete shutdown, every system going offline at once. "I shouldn't have answered," Elena said quickly. "I know that. But they said you called them last night and I just... Daniel, last night you seemed fine. Better than fine. You were happy." "I was happy." His voice was flat, empty. "Then why?" "Because I'm always happy right before it gets bad." He took his phone from her hand, carefully, like it was something dangerous. "That's how it works. I feel good. I feel normal. I think maybe I'm finally past it. And then night comes and I'm alone, and everything that's wrong with me catches up. Every time." Elena felt something crack open inside her chest. "You're not alone. You have me. For now." "What does that mean?" Daniel moved to the window, pressed his forehead against the cold glass. Outside, the laundromat's neon sign flickered in the gray afternoon light. "It means I know how this ends. I meet someone good, someone who sees something in me I can't see anymore. We get close. They start to understand exactly how broken I am. And then they leave, because why wouldn't they? Why would anyone choose this?" "Choose what? You?" "Choose the nights I can't sleep, the crowds I can't handle, the loud noises that make me disappear inside my own head for hours, the days I can't get out of bed, the version of me that needed to call a crisis line because I was standing on my balcony at 3 a.m. trying to remember why I shouldn't jump." The words landed like stones. Elena couldn't breathe properly. Were you going to tell me? I don't know. Were you going to tell me any of it? I was trying to be normal for you. His voice cracked. Just for a little while. I was trying to be the version of myself I was before everything broke. The one who could give someone a jacket and walk them to a bus and maybe deserve something good afterward. Elena wanted to go to him, wanted to wrap her arms around him and tell him it didn't matter. None of it mattered. But her feet wouldn't move. Because part of her, a part she hated but couldn't silence, was screaming that this was too much, that she'd only just started putting her own pieces back together, that she couldn't hold someone else's broken parts while still figuring out how to hold her own. I should go, she heard herself say. Daniel nodded, didn't turn around. Yeah, okay. I need to think. I understand. But he didn't sound like he understood. He sounded like he'd been expecting this. Like she was just confirming something he already knew about himself, about what he deserved, about how every good thing in his life would eventually reveal itself as temporary. Elena left. Walked down 4 flights of stairs because she couldn't stand still in the elevator. Walked through streets that had started to feel familiar, that had started to feel like hers and Daniel's streets. Their geography of midnight conversations and dawn discoveries. But now they just felt like streets again. Just concrete and buildings and people who had nothing to do with her. She made it 3 blocks before she stopped. Leaned against a brick wall in an alley between a closed bookstore and a bar that wouldn't open for hours. She was still wearing his jacket, the original one. The one that smelled like that first night, like cold and coffee and the specific courage it takes to help a stranger. Her phone buzzed, a text from her friend Maya. Still on for drinks Friday? Need to hear about Mystery Jacket Guy. Mystery Jacket Guy. Like Daniel was a story she was telling. An anecdote about a romantic night. Not a real person with real pain who'd called a crisis line 12 hours after kissing her forehead. Elena slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold pavement. And for the first time since her parents died, she let herself cry. Really cry. The kind that comes from somewhere deeper than sadness. Grief, maybe. Or recognition. The acknowledgement that loving someone, really loving them, means seeing all of them and choosing to stay anyway. And she didn't know if she was strong enough for that. She'd spent 6 years protecting herself, building walls, making her world small enough to control. The gallery, her art, coffee shops where she knew the menu, friendships that stayed surface level. She'd convinced herself it was healing, this careful construction of a manageable life. But maybe it was just cowardice. Maybe she'd been so afraid of losing someone again that she'd stopped letting anyone get close enough to lose. And then Daniel gave her his jacket. The memory came back sharp and clear. His face that first night, the way he'd looked at her when she asked why he was used to the cold. Not with pity, not with expectation, just with recognition. Like he saw someone else who'd learned to survive winter by pretending they didn't feel the cold at all. Elena pulled out her phone, stared at Daniel's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button, but she didn't call. Not yet. Because before she could help Daniel, before she could be what he needed, she had to figure out what she was running from. Had to face the truth she'd been avoiding since that bus stop. That she was just as broken as he was, just better at hiding it. That her carefully constructed life wasn't peace. It was just a different kind of crisis. One that happened in slow motion. So gradually you didn't notice you were drowning until someone threw you a lifeline and you realized you'd forgotten how to grab it. She went home. Made tea she didn't drink. Sat at her window watching the city move through its evening routines. Somewhere out there, Daniel was in his apartment above a laundromat, probably calling the crisis line back, probably apologizing for worrying them, probably alone, probably certain that he'd been right all along, that anyone who really saw him would leave. And Elena realized something that changed everything. She didn't leave because of his brokenness. She left because of her own. Because seeing his pain meant acknowledging her own. Because if she admitted he needed help, she'd have to admit she'd been needing help too. For 6 years. Since the phone call that told her both her parents were gone and she was alone in the world. Since the funeral where she didn't cry because crying meant accepting it was real. Since every single day after, when she woke up and chose survival over actually living. The photograph, the one in Daniel's apartment, turned face down on the windowsill. She hadn't asked about it, but now she understood why it was hidden. Some things are too painful to look at directly. You have to approach them sideways, build up to them. Trust that when you finally turn them over, someone will be there to help you remember that what's in the picture existed, was real, was loved. Elena looked at her own apartment. At the walls she'd never decorated, because decorating meant committing to being somewhere. At the boxes she'd never fully unpacked, because unpacked meant permanent, and permanent meant she could lose it all again. At the life she'd been living like someone just passing through, waiting for permission to stay. Her phone rang. Not Daniel. The gallery. Her boss. Elena, sorry to call so late. Listen, I got an offer today. Someone wants to buy the gallery, turn it into condos. I'm thinking of taking it, which means, well, I wanted to give you a heads up. You'd have until the end of March to find something else. Elena thanked her, hung up, laughed, sharp and bitter. Of course the universe would take this too, the one stable thing in her carefully constructed temporary life. But then something shifted. A thought, clear and bright. What if this wasn't the universe taking something? What if it was the universe pushing her towards something? What if every single thing that had happened, the missed train, the cold night, the jacket, Daniel, this phone call, was life trying to tell her that she couldn't keep hiding? That it was time to stop just surviving and start building something real? Even if real meant risk, meant vulnerability, meant the possibility of losing it all? She grabbed her coat. Not Daniel's jacket, her own. She needed to do this as herself, not as the person his jacket had made her feel like she could be. The walk to Daniel's apartment took 20 minutes. Every step, she rehearsed what she'd say. By the time she climbed the 4 flights of stairs, she'd forgotten all of it. She knocked, waited. The door opened slowly. Daniel looked terrible, eyes red, face drawn, like he'd aged years in the hours since she'd left. I'm broken too, Elena said. Not what she'd planned. Not eloquent, but true. Daniel stared at her. I'm broken too, she said again. I've been broken since I was 19, and I lost everyone, and I never learned how to be whole again. I just learned how to function, how to pretend, how to keep everything temporary, so it can't hurt me when it's gone. And when I saw your pain today, I ran because it meant I had to look at my own. She was crying now. Couldn't stop. But here's what I realized. We're not going to fix each other. That's not how this works. But maybe we can stop pretending we're not broken. Maybe we can be broken together and that's enough. Maybe that's more than enough. Maybe that's everything. Daniel's face crumpled. He pulled her inside, into his arms, and they stood there, in his sparse apartment, holding each other like two people who'd been drowning separately, and just realized they could float if they stopped fighting the water. I don't know how to do this, Daniel whispered against her hair. Neither do I. I'm scared I'll hurt you. I'm scared I'll run again. What if we're too broken? Elena pulled back just enough to see his face. Then we're too broken. But we're too broken together. And there, in that moment, something began. Not healing. That would take time. Would take work. Would take more than love could provide on its own. But acknowledgement. The kind that only comes when two people stop performing and start showing each other the raw, unfinished parts. The parts that don't photograph well. The parts that need more than a jacket in winter. The parts that need spring. They didn't fix each other that winter, but they learned how to exist in the same broken space without pretending the cracks weren't there. February was the hardest month. Not because anything terrible happened, but because nothing did. Just the slow, difficult work of showing up. Of Daniel calling Elena at 2 a.m. when the walls started closing in. Not because she could fix it, but because her voice on the phone was proof that someone in the world knew he existed and chose to care anyway. Of Elena sitting in Daniel's apartment on the days she couldn't paint, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but exist in the gray space between depression and functionality, while he made her tea and didn't ask her to be anything more than exactly what she was in that moment. They went to therapy, separately at first, then together. Sat in uncomfortable chairs in offices that smelled like lavender and desperation, and talked about things they'd buried so deep they'd forgotten they were carrying them. Daniel talked about the friends he'd lost overseas, about the sounds that still made him hit the ground, about the guilt of surviving when better people hadn't. Elena talked about the last conversation she'd had with her mother. An argument about something so trivial she couldn't even remember what it was. Only that she'd hung up angry and never got to apologize because 3 hours later, both her parents were gone. About how she'd been punishing herself for 6 years by refusing to build anything permanent, as if that would somehow keep her safe from loss. The therapist, a woman in her 60s who'd seen it all and had the kind eyes to prove it, told them something that changed how they understood their story. She said that trauma doesn't make you broken. It makes you rearranged. All the pieces are still there. They just don't fit together the way they used to. And sometimes, you meet someone whose pieces are rearranged too, and even though nothing clicks perfectly, you learn to build something new from what remains. March came slowly, then all at once. The city started thawing. Patches of brown earth appeared through melting snow like promises. Birds returned. Days stretched. And Elena and Daniel found themselves standing at a threshold neither of them had expected to reach. Spring. The gallery closed on a Tuesday. Elena packed up her desk, said goodbye to artists she'd worked with, to the quiet spaces between paintings where she'd learned to breathe again. Her boss hugged her, told her she had a gift, told her the world needed her to stop hiding it. Elena cried, but they were different tears than the ones she'd cried in that alley. These were goodbye tears, release tears, the kind that come when you're ready to let something go because you're finally brave enough to reach for something else. Daniel helped her carry boxes to her apartment that evening. They ordered takeout and sat on her floor, still mostly unpacked after 6 years, and Elena said something she'd been thinking about for weeks. "I want to open my own gallery." Daniel looked up from his noodles. "Yeah?" "Yeah, something small. Not commercial. A space for art that doesn't fit anywhere else. The weird stuff, the painful stuff, the honest stuff." She paused. "I've been hiding behind other people's vision for so long, curating other people's truth. I think it's time I showed some of my own. I think that's the bravest thing I've ever heard. I'm terrified. That's how you know it matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, the city hummed with evening traffic. Inside, something was shifting. Not healing. That wasn't the right word. Becoming. That was closer. They were becoming people who could hold both pain and joy, who could be terrified and brave simultaneously, who could love without needing the other person to complete them, but choosing to build something together anyway. "I want to show you something," Daniel said. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through photos, then stopped, handed it to her. It was the photograph from his windowsill. 3 men in military uniforms, arms around each other, sun-weathered and grinning. They looked so young, so certain the world was something they could understand. "Jake and Marcus," Daniel said quietly, pointing. "We went through basic together, deployed together. They didn't make it back. His voice was steady but soft. I kept their picture face down because I felt guilty. Every time I laughed, every time I felt anything good, I'd think about them, about how they don't get to feel anything anymore. And it seemed wrong, that I survived and they didn't. And now? Now I think they'd want me to laugh, to feel good things, to give my jacket to a stranger at a bus stop and see what happens. He looked at her. They'd want me to live. Really live. Not just survive. Elena set the phone down carefully, reached over and took his hand. Tell me about them. Not how they died, who they were. So Daniel did. He told her about Jake's terrible jokes and Marcus's obsession with comic books and the time they'd gotten lost during a training exercise and ended up at a diner 2 states away. He told her the good stuff, the human stuff, the things that made them more than just casualties. And as he talked, something in his face changed. The guilt was still there. It would probably always be there. But it wasn't the only thing anymore. When spring truly arrived, it came like an apology. Sudden warmth. Trees exploding into green. Flowers pushing through earth that had been frozen for months. The city transformed. And with it, so did they. Elena found a space for her gallery in the same neighborhood as the docks, a former warehouse with high ceilings and light that poured through industrial windows. It needed work. It needed vision. It needed someone brave enough to imagine what it could become. She signed the lease on the first day of April, and Daniel helped her paint the walls. They worked late into the evening, covered in primer, laughing at their own incompetence, ordering pizza they ate sitting on the concrete floor surrounded by drop cloths and possibility. I still have your jacket, Elena said, apropos of nothing. Daniel smiled. I know. I see you wearing it. It's spring now. Technically, I should give it back. Do you want to give it back? Elena considered this. No. I think I want to keep it forever. Is that allowed? There are no rules, Daniel said. We're making this up as we go. And maybe that was the whole point. Maybe there were no rules for this. No instruction manual for how 2 broken people build something together. No guarantee it would work. No promise that the work they were doing, on themselves, on each other, on this fragile, tentative thing they were calling love, would be enough. But maybe enough wasn't the right measure anyway. Maybe what mattered was the choosing, the showing up, the radical act of being seen in your entirety and deciding that visibility was worth the risk. The gallery opened in May. Elena curated an exhibit called Rearranged, works from artists who'd experienced trauma, loss, displacement. Art that didn't flinch from pain but didn't glorify it either. Art that said, this happened to me, and I'm still here, and this is what it looks like to keep existing in a world that breaks people and expects them to pretend they're whole. Daniel came to the opening. Stood in a corner, overwhelmed by the crowd but present. Elena found him during a quiet moment, took his hand. Thank you, she said. For what? For giving me your jacket. For keeping your promise, even though it scared you. For being broken in a way that helped me understand my own brokenness. Thank you for coming back, Daniel said. That night you left and then returned. You could have stayed gone. Most people would have. I'm not most people. No, you're not. They stood together watching strangers engage with art that told difficult truths. And Elena thought about that bus stop, about how she'd been standing there thinking her life was small and manageable and safe, about how Daniel had appeared like an answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. Was it fate? That question from the beginning? Or cruel irony? Maybe it was neither. Maybe it was just 2 people being in the wrong place at the right time. 2 people rearranged by life, standing at the exact intersection where their particular brokenness could recognize itself in someone else. Maybe that's all love ever is. Not finding your other half, but finding someone whose damage fits alongside yours in a way that makes the weight bearable. Summer came, then fall, then winter again, But this time, when the cold returned, Elena had a gallery that was hers. Daniel had a new job, teaching self-defense at a community center for veterans. They had an apartment together, one they'd decorated intentionally, with photographs on the walls and plans for next month and the month after. They had therapy appointments and bad days and good days, and all the messy, complicated in-between days that make up actual lives rather than stories. They still had nightmares. Still had moments when the world felt like too much. Still called crisis lines when needed and learned that needing help wasn't weakness but wisdom. But they also had each other. And that jacket, which Elena never did return, which hung in their closet like a reminder. Sometimes salvation comes dressed as an ordinary moment. Sometimes the thing that saves you is as simple as someone saying, "You're shaking," and caring enough to do something about it. On the anniversary of that first night, they went back to the bus stop. It looked different in daylight, smaller, less mythical. Just a bus stop in a city full of them. But they stood there anyway, holding hands, remembering who they'd been that night. Two strangers who had no idea they were about to become each other's home. "Do you think we would have found each other if not for that night?" Elena asked. Daniel thought about it. "I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not." "Does it matter?" "No," Elena said. "I guess it doesn't." Because here was the truth they'd learned. It doesn't matter if it was fate or chance or cosmic coincidence. What matters is what you do with the moments you're given. What matters is whether you're brave enough to turn a single act of kindness into something lasting. What matters is whether you can look at your own brokenness, at someone else's brokenness, and decide that broken isn't the same as worthless. They walked home through streets that belonged to both of them now. The sun was setting, painting the city in shades of amber and gold. Spring would come again, and again, and again. And each time, they'd be a little less rearranged, a little more settled into the shape of who they were becoming. Not fixed, not whole, but together. And maybe, in the end, that was its own kind of wholeness. Maybe love wasn't about finding someone who completed you. Maybe it was about finding someone who helped you understand that you were never incomplete in the first place. Just rearranged. Just learning, like everyone else, how to live in a world that breaks people and then asks them to be brave enough to love anyway. And sometimes, on cold nights, Elena still wore that jacket. Still breathed in the fading smell of coffee and cedar and that first night when a stranger saw her shaking and offered the only warmth he had. Because some things you keep forever. Not because you need them anymore, but because they remind you who you were when someone first saw you clearly and decided you were worth the cold.